welcome back from the break, folks. Thank you for coming back. Next up, we are going to dive into a panel discussion, and same goes as before. If you would like to ask questions in real time on the app, I have access to those. Just pop them in, and then we'll come to them when it's time for questions. So this particular panel, we're talking about navigating NIS2, CAF, and the UK Cyber Bill. Obviously, as the UK and Europe up their game with legislative frameworks, we now need to talk about not only how to prepare, but also how to spin that into a competitive advantage where and how we can. So I've got my panel of experts to dive into that with me. You've met Jamie before, I believe, on the end of our panel, but can we get some introductions from our other experts too? Neil, let's start with you.
Yep, hi everybody. So I'm Neil Langridge, I'm the Marketing and Alliances Director at E92+, so we're a cybersecurity distributor, obviously working with CyberSmart and I'm sure lots of you in the room, basically a range of cybersecurity technologies helping our VAR and MSP partners take them out to market.
Thank you. And John?
Thanks. My name is John Shackleton. I work for Sharp, a company that you've probably come across. The part of the business I work for is the B2B business, mainly focusing around print and the visual sort of pro displays. The reason why I'm here today is that we are, as an organization, like many print OEMs, diversifying from print because, face it, people don't print as much as they used to, so we've got to do something else. And we're looking at developing our IT services business, of which MSP is a large part. And we've been working with CyberSmart for a number of years in the UK on the Cyber Essentials program. And NIS2 got on our radar. My brief is a European brief, so I'll look after all of our European subsidiaries. This came on our radar about 2 years ago. NIS2, didn't really know what to make of it at the time, but what really focused the mind was some of our European customers starting asking us, what is your position on NIS2? Yeah, what's your view? Yeah, what are you doing in this space? So that's when we started to take it really quite seriously. And we started talking to these guys, about how can we take what they've done in the UK with Cyber Essentials and develop a NIS2 service offering. So I think that's why I'm here, to talk a bit about NIS2 and what we're doing on the European side of the business. Okay.
Thank you very much. Just to check in, can you hear us okay with these mics? Everyone's comfortable hearing? Fantastic. Perfect. So let's kind of just talk about, first off, decoding the legislation and what kind of impacts they're having. Neil, can I come to you when it comes to NIS2, CAF, and the UK Cybersecurity Bill, or Cyber Resilience Bill, what do you think the biggest impacts are that our MSPs, partners and friends in the room need to be aware of, need to keep top of mind?
Yeah, I think when NIS2 came in, there was a greater awareness, there was a need for updating the regulations to make it much more contemporary and more modern, but I still think in the UK, there's not the level of awareness there necessarily should be. A lot of organisations say they're ready, but not necessarily so. The real big change is obviously with the UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, and I think that the biggest change is lots of us in the room are now, I don't want to necessarily use the phrase in the crosshairs, but we're now part of it. The inclusion of MSPs as being a fundamental part of supply chain and effectively critical national infrastructure changes it completely. So it's not just about us helping customers become compliant. We all need to become compliant as part of the entire kind of technology ecosystem. So I think it's kind of raised the profile of MSPs in terms of the importance and the role we play, but also raise the level in terms of the scrutiny back. Customers are going to ask more questions. I think it's a good thing. It means all of us are going to raise our game, and it means it's going to be at the forefront of more customer conversations as well, and it's going to raise the profile of cybersecurity and increase more conversations. But it's definitely going to mean that MSPs, are definitely not going to be able to be kind of take it too lightly. It's going to need to be at the front of everybody's conversation, without a doubt. And I think the other thing about it is it's going to expand. I think that one of the things the government have talked about very clearly, building into the legislation, is the fact that it's going to change. this is not a kind of one hit and we're done for 5 years. They want to build in the flexibility to change quickly. So I think we're all going to need to be a little bit lighter on our feet and up on regulation a bit more than we've previously been used to being.
Yeah. I know when Annette was talking about status quo bias, I thought that doesn't really suit the people in this room. If you get used to one thing, then you're not in the wrong industry, aren't you, with this space? John, you were talking to me about how your customers have been coming to you and asking you about NIS2, what should we be doing, how can you help us? What other impacts are you noticing that you think you want to share should be top of mind?
Sure. Well, the difference between Cyber Essentials, I guess, or there's a number of differences, but key differences between Cyber Essentials and NIS2 is that NIS2 isn't voluntary, yeah, it's mandatory. It is legislation, so organizations don't have a chance to say, yeah, we're going to do it for the following reasons. They have to do it. And NIS has been around for quite some time, but what NIS2 does is expand the scope of that in terms of the industries covered and also the size of organizations that are now regulated. So, you know, we're talking about the sort of M bit of SMB, covered now by NIS2. And as I say, it's legislation, it's law. So there isn't a point in time, yeah, we get to this stage, we do an audit, we pass the audit, and then we can forget about it until the next audit comes around, and then we panic and do the same again, rinse and repeat. So it's broadened the scope of the industries covered, and it's also reduced the bar for organizations. I think it's 50 people and 10 million euro turnover. So that's squarely in the M bit of SMB. And that is where our sweet spot for our clients are. So what it gives is, at that point, is the engagement at the level. Because it's legislation, they have to do it. It sort of raises the conversation from a tech-type conversation, yeah, to more of a business, yeah? And what we're finding is that a lot of organizations, not just the small ones, but we've actually got large organizations coming to us saying, what does this mean for my business? How do I begin? Where do I get started? What do I need to do? Help me. And we've actually found that not just the small end of it, but large organizations are facing the same challenges. For example, in Sweden, we're running a pilot with one of our larger customers over there, about 1,500 employees. And we've been able to have that discussion at board level. Yeah, so it's elevated our presence within that organization. And you know, once you get at that level, then sort of budget is secondary. We all sort of challenge with getting budgets approved for investments. But when you're talking at board level, and that's about governance and risk, then we're finding that budget is a secondary consideration. Just help me get through this. And you know, we're still in the early days of launching this service, but you know, the whole process starts with a risk assessment. The risk assessment is a very, very detailed, broad scope assessment of their security posture, and it is a bit more detailed than Cyber Essentials. From that, yeah, we create a gap analysis. Yeah, and that gap analysis is, again, very broad. And that gap analysis, if you're at the board level talking to them about the risk and then the gaps, that means that there's a potential there, yeah, because you've added that value to go through and plug those gaps with other security services in your portfolio. So we see it as a huge potential, taking it forward for that reason.
Talking of potential, I mentioned that this panel discussion, I'd love to delve into how we're pivoting, to use a cliche, what are changing goalposts into opportunity. How are you, and what advice can you share with our friends in the room, opening up new conversations with customers and generating demand? What can you share on that? Jamie, can I come to you first, please?
So two perspectives on this area. Firstly, customers are already asking about this. Does it apply to us? And so if you do have any customers who are in critical national infrastructure, it's a good question to ask is like, have you heard about this new legislation that's coming? It's rolling out across Europe. So Network Information System Directive 2. It's a follow-on of the original NIS directive launched at the same time as GDPR with much less fanfare. So many of them will have heard of it anyway, or within the circles that they're in, their regulators will be talking about this as well. In addition to that, you will also have organizations you work with who are now newly coming into scope. So they might be in those industries that are all listed on the website, but they might be smaller. So as long as they're, as you mentioned, medium-sized organizations, 10 million turnover or above, this can be applicable to them. So that's European organizations, and we're going to see a similar mirroring of that legislation in the UK. Obviously, in a post-Brexit world, it's not called NIS2 anymore. It's a cybersecurity and resilience bill, but in my mind, it's essentially ensuring equivalence between the UK and Europe. So that's the market perspective. From our perspective at CyberSmart, it's really about breaking down some of this complexity around legislation. There's lots of steps in there. There's lots of technical aspects. There's commercial aspects too, to engage boards and other stakeholders within the organization. How can we build a proposition that supports you, our partners, to take to your customers and say, don't worry, we're going to break this down into a step-by-step process, and we're going to understand firstly where you're at, put together a plan, as John mentioned, and work with you through that plan. So that's the bit I'm most excited about, is how we can help you to address some of this, because it can seem quite daunting, quite complex and challenging, and you're not, as we're not, legal and compliance experts in interpreting NIS jurisdiction law. However, I think we can all step our customers through understanding their requirements and putting together a plan with them. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for our partners.
Great. John, what about your approach? What advice would you share for kind of creating more avenues of discussion and opportunities around these regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, sure. I think I said before, we're experiencing, it's not a tech sale, yeah? So positioning, and I think we had it in an earlier session, taking the positives and addressing, the board, whether that's the CEO, the chairman, but getting at that level and getting the message over that NIS2 is going to be positive for your business, It's managing risk, and at that level, they're worried about risk to their business. Once, I think it was also said, educate, It's not a sale, it's not a pitch at that stage. It's about making sure that you're positioning yourself as an organization that they understand, that you can help, that can help them achieve that cyber posture, that if they did have an audit, they have confidence that they would get through it. So it's, we started, we're starting to see the results come through of more PR, rather than pitch, education, awareness, and, I think the market, you've got some organisation asking, right, how's this going to affect? A lot of organisations are in denial. Remember GDPR, will it affect me? No, we'll forget about it for the time being because it's somewhere down there on the list. I've got to put out fires here. So we'll look at it tomorrow. The thing that changes that is the publicity around the big fines that come out, as it was with GDPR. So, once we get some fines being activated, and also within the NIS2 regulation there are personal liabilities for the executives, similar in the way to GDPR, then I think you'll see a lot of actions start to flood through. But at the meantime, I think it's a case of education, get your organisation positioned in the mind of those decision makers that you can help them, meet this legislation. I would also say as well, if I may, is that, okay, thank you, is that, there's been a mention of supply chain as well, So it doesn't affect the UK, right? NIS2 is a European, come from the European, it's gone through local government, local country legislation in Europe. But one thing it does have obligation on is for those regulated organisations, that they need to look after their supply chain, So we're talking about competitive advantage. If you have NIS2 ready, or you've gone through that process, and your organisation is part of the supply chain for European companies, and there are about 160,000 organisations across Europe, so it's not insignificant, then that potentially is competitive advantage if you have those necessary technical and process controls. If you don't, then that's a competitive disadvantage. Yeah, so, sorry.
No, you may, always. Can I ask about, I've been thinking about the psychology behind these decisions, not only from a customer's standpoint, but also from the MSPs that you work with and partners. Neil, when it comes to what is driving the demand and interest around NIS2 and how to prepare, what do you think is driving that interest? Is it reputational jeopardy? Is it social media? Is it media coverage of disasters that are happening? What do you think is the sort of baseline to propel that interest?
Yeah, I mean, you do talk about compelling events, and when you get major organisations that we all know and use on the front page of the BBC News website, I count that as a compelling event.
Yeah.
That definitely creates more customer conversations. And we're going to keep mentioning supply chain, I think, pretty much every question. But I think that one of the things that, for example, that kind of came out of the ones around Co-op and M&S and all of that was the impact not just on those organisations, but on their supply chains. It wasn't just M&S not being able to sell prawn sandwiches to everybody at lunchtime. It was the people who make the prawn sandwiches who then had a load of stock that they're not necessarily going to be able to sell. So the impact on organisations on high profile attacks definitely does work. And if I'm going to put my marketing hat on, it's an interesting one around the cybersecurity and resilience bill. We all know in tech we're really bad with acronyms, and I think it's the way that they've actually called it what it is, I think is actually really useful in terms of just driving the conversation. Because if you go to your customers and we say we're going to talk about NIS2 regulations, especially when you're trying to have that board level conversation, it sounds technical straight, and what does NIS2 mean? If you talk about cybersecurity and resilience bill, straight away, even at a board level, if you're not technical, you know what that's going to be. So I think actually just sometimes how it's framed, I think is actually really, really important. And I think the other part of that, again, reference back to things like GDPR. You know, from a marketing perspective, when GDPR came out, Info Security Europe, the first event after GDPR, everybody was talking about GDPR, every vendor had it. If any of you went to InfoSec last month, can anybody remember seeing a single reference to GDPR on any stand? No. AI, yes, but GDPR not necessarily, because it felt like a one thing. It felt like a compliance hit. I think the change with these regulations is that it's not a checklist. It's not a one-off that you have to do once a year like a pen test. It is ongoing and something that organisations need to look at on a continuous basis. And around that resilience, it's not just about tech, it's around business continuity. So I think the way it's positioned and the way it's drawn up, are much more outcome focused rather than a compliance checklist, I think is really important, and that is helping elevate the conversation, into the boardroom and with more customers being proactive and wanting to address it.
I wanted to pick on the supply chain bit. So we heard from Tom earlier, 14% of organizations are reviewing their immediate suppliers. Under cybersecurity and resilience bill on NIS2, that needs to go to 100% of anyone who's in that. So you can imagine the size of gap that organizations out there need to close. And this is large, you said 50% of large organizations are reviewing their immediate suppliers. So half of those large companies, many of which will have hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of suppliers, need to go from zero to full visibility of where their immediate risk sits. So that's a huge challenge, also one that you can help the organizations you work with to navigate. I just thought it was an interesting facet on the supply chain, because we talk about it so much, and yet, as Tom said, the adoption rate is abysmal. 86% of orgs haven't even done it.
John, does that resonate with you, what's been said here about how the supply chain piece is probably one of the biggest drivers for people to start thinking about this? Because you said that people coming to you and literally saying, help, I don't understand this, what do I do? How can you just kind of get this off my desk? So would you say that is one of the drivers, that people just don't want to think too much about this? Or is it supply chain? What's your view?
I think it's both. I really do think, as I say, that we developed the NIS2 service in conjunction with CyberSmart, thinking, which size of organisation, what's the profile of a company that will need our assistance? Thinking that, say, up at the sort of mid-market and corporate, the CISO function, that they'd be all over it. But because specifically NIS2 regulation isn't, as we've said, a tick box exercise, it's having the necessary process controls and technical controls in place, that unpicking the legislation or getting your security posture right is complex in itself, just scoping what NIS2 covers. Now, one of the things about this service is that we're very good at that front end, or CyberSmart have been very good at that front end risk assessment piece, and that's where it starts with. The technology comes way later, but it's getting that risk assessment right. So it is, it's a process that's been quite well defined, and at the end of it, out comes, the gap analysis, I think I mentioned, and then that opportunity. And because it's not just a point-in-time snapshot, for an MSP, it's monitoring. It's that continual monitoring, continual making sure that you're in compliance. Not just at the endpoint, but for the pen test, for the networking, all of that. So a huge opportunity. And of course, as Jamie mentioned, the supply chain is very much front of mind for everybody now, in terms of the impact that the supply chain can have on the resilience. So of an organization, cyber resilience of an organization. So I think, we'll start with the regulated companies because that's front of mind for them. But over time, I think like GDPR, I know from my own organization, any new vendors we bring on board, we have to go through a compliance and governance process. So we'll find that trickling down, not just from those directly regulated organizations, but down more and more into the supply chain. And that is likely to be mandated, I would imagine.
Thank you. I'm going to very shortly open up the floor for questions. I've got my roaming mic, Vicky, at the back ready to go, and then I'll come to you. But also, if you want to pop them on the app, you can do, and then we can answer them in real time. So I will come to you very shortly. But just one last thing from me around advice for our friends in the room about if you're designing specific packages around compliance, almost as a bit of a safety net to catch more interest in this space. And if so, how are you going about it? What's working? Neil?
Yeah, I think we talk about opportunity. There is an opportunity, but I think potentially it's going to push a lot of us out of our comfort zone. Yeah. Without a doubt. There's always opportunity, but then there's always risk in that to be able to talk. One of the stats that came out of one of the government surveys was, yes, we talk about the technology, but it was less than a fifth of organisations had a proper incident response plan. So, but when you start talking about that, it's around business consultancy, and again, the resilience part of the bill. A key part of the cybersecurity and resilience bill is the reporting. It's not just about the cybersecurity protect and defend. It's about what happens if something goes wrong or when something goes wrong. And that, again, is not just about technology. It's around marketing, it's around HR, it's helping organisations get back up and running. But it's about communication out there. There's notification, there's obligations to notify the authorities within 24 hours, it's to provide a proper report within 72 hours. Businesses need to be able to be set up to respond when something goes wrong and have an instant response plan in place. So all of this kind of services and consultancy, for everybody in the room here, this is an opportunity, but it is also a little bit out of our comfort zone. So I think one of the key things for MSPs to be able to think about is, how can I offer that services to my customers? How can I become more valuable to them? It definitely, again, elevates that conversation and that partnership with your customer beyond just being a technology supplier to being a business partner, but what are building out that partner ecosystem of working with vendors, working with distributors, to be able to make sure that you've got the right experts as part of your own partner ecosystem to make sure that you can offer those services to your customers and become, the most important trusted advisor that they're going to need, potentially when something goes wrong.
It's like a catalyst for those relationships changing in a way. Completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything to add, panelists, before I open the floor?
I have 2 points. Just interesting you mentioned around risk, and it's a really good point that was talked about a few days ago, like starting to perceive this not just as, and have the conversation not just around cyber or technical risk, but business risk. I think that was a big takeaway from me. The other big takeaway from our Northern CyberSmart.live was a new acronym, this is what we do in this industry, RBS, or Relief-Based Selling. It was coined by Julia over here.
I'm going to invoice you for that, by the way.
Yeah, so relief-based selling, essentially, we have this acronym, Fear, Uncertainty and Doubt, or FUD, in the industry. We talked about positioning, we've talked about how partners can do this, and you're right, it's scary. We have to offer new compliance services, learn legislation, try and talk confidently about a subject we know very little about at the start. And so we've got to overcome that. But ultimately, what the customer is looking for is you to tell them that I'm going to do my very best to help you navigate this. This is my role. This is your role. And I will find the resources and support needed. I'll find the right vendors, and we'll work through this together. So offering relief to your customers really what is really powerful, I think, from a position perspective. You're not there to solve all their problems, not a silver bullet. You're not going to take all their pain away, but you can help them to alleviate their challenges and at least help them to do something proactive about this new regulation coming in place.
Thank you. It's a really interesting angle. That's why I came up with it. No, I'm kidding. Let me open the floor. I'd love to come and chat to you directly. Let me hand you the microphone.
Hello. My question is 3 parts. I hope that's okay. We're seeing increasingly on the supply chain, customers are asking tough questions of their suppliers and asking if they have ISO 27001. So my question is, what's the difference between 27001 and NIS2? How easy is it for a company that's got ISO 27000 to transition to NIS2? If CyberSmart are offering NIS2 services, are you becoming an ISMS? And the 4th bonus question, if that's okay, how do we go about getting a quote from CyberSmart to help us get someone through NIS2?
Okay, we'll start right at the beginning. So NIS2 and ISO 27001. So there's actually a lot of really good guidance published by NIS2 on this topic exactly. There's probably about a 7 to an 80% overlap between the two at that level. So it doesn't mean if you achieve one, you achieve the other. And obviously that one's a regulatory thing and the other one's a framework. So the NIS2 actually recommend using a structured governance framework such as ISO, including the ones that end in 2, so the implementation guidelines, to meet the requirements of NIS2. So you can utilize that as a really good starting point. It's got the structure around doing a statement of applicability, mapping your risks, like working through the controls. So actually it's a recommended way of doing so. And you can use an ISMS in order to do that. So that's, I think, your first 2 questions. Second one, or the third one, was around is CyberSmart going to build an ISMS and how can you buy it if there is one? So currently we're focusing on the biggest problem that organizations face, which is, as John mentioned, is firstly understanding it and what you currently are, your current state, and putting together an action plan to implement the next logical steps in that. And it doesn't mean that we will be providing all of those next steps, but our partners like Sharp and like many of you in the room can actually help customers to plug those gaps. And it will often be something that is non-technical, like have you tested your incident response policy? Do you even have a policy in the first place? So we're starting with the foundations, like can people assess where they're at? Can they put together an action plan and can they see progress towards that end goal? In order to buy it, I think you need to speak to your account manager. Who's your account manager? Rebecca. We don't have Rebecca, I don't think, but we'll find you one. Rihanna, okay, Rihanna's around somewhere. Or you can have a chat with John over there. John, put your hand up. I'm in John's seat actually today. So, yeah, John will help you with that.
Could I just add to that? I think the NIS2 is similar to GDPR in that it's not a certification, yeah? It's a process, it's having the control. So, when we do vendor profile, work for Sharp, it's a big organisation, lots of compliance stuff that in fact takes about half of my time, yeah, ticking boxes of compliance. So, when we onboard vendors, yeah, you can ask, have you got ISO 27001? Yeah, tick. Yeah, that's part of the vendor onboarding. When you talk about GDPR, yeah, because it's not a certification, you have to go into more detail about the questions that we ask our vendors, like how long do you store, who has access to that data, yada, yada, yada. I guess the way it will happen with NIS2, and yeah, it's yet to be enacted into certain countries, it's just going live at the minute at different levels, is that those questions, yeah, that comprise the controls of NIS2 will be cascaded down to organisations when taken on board as part of that organisation's supply chain, similar to GDPR. So.
And the other thing I'd mention, that I'm going to avoid the technical elements of your question as well, but I think one of the positive things that we're seeing what's being done by NCSE around CAF and with the upcoming cybersecurity resilience bill, I think there's a much greater focus not just on technical compliance, but on business outcomes of like what we're doing this, but what is the reason we're doing this to increase resilience. So I think that's a positive part of the conversation. You need to have the technical conversation and around the compliance and everything, but there is a much better opportunity to frame the conversation around regulation compliance, around this is what it is for your business and this is the business outcomes. We're not just doing technology for technology's sake, or laws and regulations for a tick box's sake. So I'd say, you know, there's positive conversations to be had, and I think the legislation is, in a good way, is really designed to support that.
Thank you very much for your question. I'll come to the middle first off. 4 questions.
Well, it's just sort of following on from the NIS2 discussion. It's just that with the IASME cyber assurance scheme that's already in place, we as a company decided that we'd like to go through the cyber advisor scheme. So what we're doing at the moment is going through the IASME cyber assurance, and that goes into a great deal of detail with, you know, obviously risk assessments, policy creation, asset management, and everything else. Is that not a channel that you might decide to explore?
That's me again, right? So cyber advisors, is everyone aware of the cyber advisor scheme? I think Tom mentioned it briefly or had it on the ecosystem side. So I knew a few of you. So essentially there isn't enough people in the UK to help all the organisations that need all the support when it comes to implementing and maintaining even baseline cybersecurity. So cyber advisor, a way of increasing the amount of people working in the industry and to help organisations to navigate implementation and technical challenges, not just audit and assessment. So it's broadening out the scope of services that security experts can provide to organisations. Can that apply to something like NIS2? I think potentially, or cybersecurity and resilience bill. I don't think it's currently very focused on helping people implement baseline cybersecurity controls rather than holistic, even though it includes elements of risk assessment, etc. So I presume there'd be something more comprehensive around that. I think my personal answer is I think CAF is a really structured framework in order to implement cybersecurity and resilience bill or even NIS2. I think just like ISO is a good way of implementing NIS2. So I'd say probably brushing up on CAF. It's really straightforward. It's all on the NCSE's website. Looking at what principles on there. We did a webinar on it a few months ago. So looking at the principles, starting to look at it for your own organisation. We had a really good question a couple days ago where the partner was asking around, are they excluded from competitive opportunities because they're a small MSP, so they don't by default fall into the legislation? And what was my perspective on that? And I said, if you can, then go and meet the regulation, meet the requirements and demonstrate that to your customers. I think that's a competitive advantage. So regardless of whether you're a medium or large MSP, I think it's something you should look at for your own organisation. And just that starting point will be a good perspective to talk to your customers. Is we've actually implemented CAF for ourselves. This is the 4 areas we went through. It took us a few months to get through. This is where we had challenges. It's a good conversation, I think, to have with customers. Sorry, does that answer your question? I went a bit off piece there.
More to do with the IASME.
I don't think the IASME one's going to cover cybersecurity and resilience bill, but maybe wrong.
No, because I think it follows the SIT. It sort of maps to that rather than some of the direct ISO 27001. But obviously it's a cut down version, but it would be a stepping stone.
Oh, do you mean
and it's
IASME assurance?
Well, it's not so much insurance, but it's accredited, so it's a scheme that they're working on with obviously the NCSE. And I just thought with CyberSmart's relationship with IASME as it is, whether that's something that you might consider for the future.
We will definitely give them the feedback.
Okay.
To try and get some equivalency there. I think it's a big thing that government, IASME, NCSE are trying to work on, given that there's lots of legislation and frameworks, like how do they map, and just to provide context to organisations, like we were talking before about Cyber Essentials versus ISO 27001. Now, most of you that are familiar with both will say, well, that's that's crazy. Like, they're obviously very different purposes and they're very complementary, but for a lot of organizations, it's kind of demystifying that complexity between frameworks. But yeah, we'll definitely take the feedback on.
Thank you very much. We've got a question at the back, do I believe? No, I'm just being told that we're running out of time. Fair enough. Is there one more question? And then I will wrap it up as I'm instructed to do. Could you pass it down, just because I'll get in trouble? Oh, on the app. Oh, I see. Sorry. We need to develop better sign language.
So you with the app or with me in the mic? Am I?
Whether it's time or app. Sorry.
Okay. The mic question is quite quick. Picks up on Neil's point about reporting a response. Julie, your point about expanding networks. Should we now be looking at onboarding legal representation within our organisations, or perhaps partnering up with the solicitors? Is it something CyberSmart might consider providing for us as a resource?
Do you want to take the first part? I'll take it.
Yeah, well, I would say from a partnering perspective, yes, I'd say one of the things, and the analysts talk about this, in terms of building out a partner ecosystem, the average number of kind of tech suppliers at certainly a medium to large size organisation will work with will be kind of anywhere between 6 and 8. So the reality is, whether you're a small or a large reseller, MSP, MSSP, you're not going to be the only kind of partner that's working with your customer. Not everybody can do everything. So I think looking outside of just technology, potentially to a broader ecosystem, to be able to help you build out those services, I think makes sense. Working with other organizations rather than trying to do it all yourself, I think is a good thing. And again, I think it's an opportunity to, again, broaden out your offering and your expertise to beyond just a technology supplier, but being a business consultant as well. And I think the other advantage on being able to find ways of doing that is having the conversation with your customer, and it kind of made a reference to that before, of not just we can do this for you, but we've done this for somebody else and this is what it looked like. That again, going back to that selling reassurance thing, of if you can give peace of mind because you've helped organisations similar to the customer or prospect you're talking to, that provides a huge amount of peace of mind. People always want to know what their peers are doing. So I think having that reassurance, I think there's definitely an opportunity for MSPs. As we said earlier, it's going to push all of us outside of our comfort zone, but I think that's where their opportunity lies.
I can talk to the CyberSmart perspective. Are we okay for time? Yeah. Very good. So you basically talk about legal representation for you as a firm to offer legal advice to your customers and make sure you stay within the lines. And I think there's a couple of interesting parallels. One is GDPR. So we saw the emergence of a lot of GDPR practitioners around that space who would help organizations interpret legislation for themselves, what is appropriate, what is not. It's not something we're looking to do. However, I think our perspective on this is what can we build and deliver at scale for our partners. So for example, policy packs that allow you to get started with your customers, like what does incident response look like, given that you've got 24 hours to notify your regulator, and who is that regulator in Sweden, for example, and all the different various facets of the requirements. So baking those into policy as a starter template is probably the extent that we'll go to. And it's something I think if you were to offer, and you've offered previously before, around broader compliance services, interpreting legislation, as Neil already mentioned, I think partnering with a law firm or solicitors is a good starting point.
And then just stretching the time ever so slightly, thank you for your questions on the app. Sorry that I ignored them. The first question I'll ask to you guys, and then actually there's a delicious question that pertains to our next panel, so I'll save it for that. Open floor here, panelists. How does a company decide on what they require among CAF, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, or NIS2? What goes into that decision from your perspective?
Well, mine's very easy. I work in Europe, so it's NIS2. But our subsidiary, UK subsidiary, very much involved in Cyber Essentials and new legislation as it comes down the track. In fact, speaking for our UK subsidiary, they can see, because of the supply chain thing that we said before, that European organisations, regulated organisations, will require that from their supply chain, no matter where those organisations are. So yeah, we're building a strategy about both, yeah, in the UK, yeah. So because there is an overlap, and we've sort of standardised on CyberSmart to develop that service, so bringing the two together for Cyber Essentials and also NIS2.
I mean, the easy answer on that is whatever, you have to do whatever you're legally required to. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, things like cybersecurity resilience bill, NIS2, they're not optional. So organisations have got to do what they've got to do. But I think you really do just start with the fundamentals. The first thing, if you're talking to a new customer about it, is doing a health check, doing a review of what they've got at the moment. Then you want to look at frameworks, you want to look at CAF, you want to look at the fundamentals. Then you work your way up to, you know, kind of Cyber Essentials, and then up to kind of, you know, higher levels or ISO 27001 or whatever it happens to be. So I think having a structure, you know, do the easiest things first, do the fundamental things first, take them on that journey. Don't try to make it too complicated. You know, that's again back to the reassurance thing. Customers, everybody wants easy answers, and that's not always the case. But going on a logical journey and providing that reassurance. And not trying to do too much, because not every organisation can do everything. They can't have every single piece of technology. Even if you had the budget, I mean, you'll just kill your network. So it's a case of doing it logically, doing the fundamentals, getting the basics right, and working your way up. And it absolutely is a journey. It's not just going to get done in the first 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, panellists, and thank you for your questions. Please do give them a round of applause. I'll ask you to swap your microphones with our next panellist. I'll invite